What do you picture when you think of the Vikings? Probably fierce warriors with horned helmets, which they didn't actually wear, by the way, sailing the cold seas, raiding monasteries, and living a tough, brutal life in the north. That's the story we all know from shows like Vikings or The Last Kingdom. But what if I told you that the most detailed, most shocking, and most human account of their lives wasn't written by a European monk or a fellow Viking, but an Arab diplomat from Baghdad? In the year 921, a man named Ahmad ibn Fadlan left the heart of the civilized world on a mission for his caliph. He had no idea that his journey would lead him to the rugged, untamed frontier of the north, where he would come face to face with the legendary Norsemen. He meticulously wrote down everything he saw, and his report survived for 1,000 years. This isn't just a story about Vikings. It's a story about two completely different worlds colliding. So grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's travel back in time to witness one of history's most incredible true stories. To understand our story, we first need to understand where our narrator, Ibn Fadlan, came from. This wasn't the Europe of the so-called Dark Ages. This was Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. In the 10th century, Baghdad was the biggest and richest city on earth, a shining beacon of science, art, and philosophy. While much of Europe was struggling, scholars in Baghdad's House of Wisdom were translating Greek philosophy, inventing algebra, and mapping the stars. Ibn Fadlan was a product of this sophisticated world. He was a courtier, a scholar, and a diplomat. And in 921, he was given a mission by the Caliph himself. A newly converted Muslim king far to the north, the ruler of a people called the Volga Bulgars, had sent a letter asking for help. He wanted two things: someone to teach his people the principles of Islam, and money to build a fortress to protect him from his powerful enemies, the Khazars. So, on June 21st, 921, Ibn Fadlan's caravan, a massive expedition of diplomats, teachers, and guards, set out from the city of peace, Baghdad. Their journey was brutal. They crossed deserts and mountains, but the worst part was the winter. They were forced to stop for 3 months in a city called Jurjania, where the cold was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Ibn Fadlan writes that the main river froze to a depth of 17 spans. That's over 10 feet of solid ice. He says when he would come inside from the bathhouse, his beard would be a solid block of ice that he'd have to thaw by the fire. The very earth cracked open from the cold. It was a terrifying, alien world, and they hadn't even reached their destination yet. After surviving the winter, the caravan pushed north into the vast, empty lands of the Turks. Their first major encounter was with a nomadic tribe called the Guz, or the Oghuz Turks. And this was Ibn Fadlan's first real taste of culture shock. He describes them as nomads who live in poverty like wandering asses. He was appalled by their lack of hygiene. They didn't wash with water after relieving themselves, especially not in winter. He tells one particularly unforgettable story. He was a guest in a Guz man's tent, sitting and talking. The man's wife was also there. Ibn Fadlan writes, "As we were talking, she bared her private parts and scratched while we stared at her. We covered our faces with our hands, and each said, 'I seek forgiveness from God.' Her husband began to laugh and said to the interpreter, 'Tell them this. She uncovers her private parts in your presence and you see them, but she protects them and allows no one near. Better than covering them up and letting you get at them.'" Ibn Fadlan, a man from a society where women were veiled, was simply stunned. But he recorded all of it without judgment. He noted their laws, too. Adultery, he wrote, was unknown, but if it happened, the punishment was horrific. They would tie the person to the branches of 2 bent trees and then let the trees spring back, splitting the person in 2. He also witnessed their funeral rituals. When a great man died, they would bury him in a house-like tomb and then sacrifice hundreds of his horses, saying the man would ride them to paradise. This journey was teaching Ibn Fadlan that the world was far bigger and far stranger than he could have ever imagined in Baghdad. After many more weeks of travel, they finally reached the camp of the Bulgar king, on the banks of the mighty Volga River. And it was here that he met them, the Rus. The Rus, as Ibn Fadlan called the Vikings, had traveled south from Scandinavia to trade. They were after furs, slaves, and honey, which they would sell for the most valuable currency of the age, pure silver dirham coins from the Islamic world. Ibn Fadlan's first impression was one of awe. He writes, "I have never seen bodies more perfect than theirs. They were like palm trees. They were fair and ruddy." But that awe quickly turned to disgust. Right after praising their physique, he says, "They're the filthiest of God's creatures." He then describes their morning ritual. A servant girl brings a single large bowl of water to her master. He washes his face, his hair, spits, and blows his nose into it. Then the servant takes that same bowl to the next man, who does the same thing, and so on, until everyone in the house has washed in the same foul water. It's safe to say Ibn Fadlan was not impressed. He noted that every man was tattooed in dark green designs, from the tips of his toes to his neck, and was never seen without his 3 signature weapons: an axe, a sword, and a large knife.
He was equally fascinated and horrified by their social customs. They would have with their slave girls in public, in broad daylight, while their friends watched. He even saw a merchant walk in to buy a slave girl from a Rus man, and the man didn't stop having intercourse with her until he was finished, while the customer just stood there and waited. For a pious Muslim from a conservative society, this was beyond shocking. But he kept writing, documenting everything, including their pagan worship. They would approach a giant wooden pillar carved with a human face, surrounded by smaller figures. They'd leave offerings of bread and meat and pray to the idol. "Oh my lord, I have come from a far country with this many slave girls and this many sable furs. Please send me a merchant with lots of money who will buy everything and not argue about the price." If their prayers weren't answered quickly, they would bring more gifts to the smaller idols, saying, "These are our Lord's wives, sons, and daughters. Please intercede for us." Ibn Fadlan was getting a front row seat to a culture that was raw, unapologetic, and completely alien. And then he witnessed the one event that would make his report legendary.
A Rus chieftain had died, and Ibn Fadlan learned that they were preparing for his funeral. What he saw next is the only eyewitness account of a Viking ship burial that has ever been found. First, they placed the dead chieftain in a temporary grave for 10 days while they prepared his burial clothes. Then his family asked his slave girls a chilling question: "Which of you will die with him?" One girl bravely volunteered. Once she said yes, there was no going back. For the next 10 days, she was treated like royalty. She was dressed in fine clothes and spent her days drinking, singing, and celebrating, constantly watched over by 2 other girls. On the day of the funeral, they pulled the chieftain's longship onto the shore and built a wooden frame around it. On the ship, they placed a lavish bed covered in Byzantine silk. Then an old woman arrived. Ibn Fadlan describes her as a witch, thick-bodied and sinister. The Rus called her the Angel of Death. It was her job to oversee the ritual and to kill the girl. They took the chieftain out of his grave. Ibn Fadlan notes he had turned black from the cold, but didn't smell bad. They dressed him in his finest clothes: trousers, boots, a tunic, and a silk kaftan with gold buttons, and sat him on the bed in his ship. Then the sacrifices began. They brought a dog, cut it in 2, and threw it in the ship. Then 2 horses were run until they were sweating, then hacked to pieces with swords. Then 2 cows, a rooster, and a hen. All were sacrificed and thrown aboard. Finally, it was the girl's turn. She was led from tent to tent, where the master of each tent had sex with her. They would tell her,
"Tell your master I only did this out of devotion to him."
After this, they performed a ritual where they lifted her 3 times over a wooden door frame. each time she would look into the afterlife. The first time she saw her father and mother. The second, all her dead relatives. And the third time she said, "There I see my master sitting in paradise, and paradise is green and beautiful. He is calling me. Take me to him." They led her to the ship. She took off her bracelets and gave them to the angel of death. Men handed her a cup of mead. She sang a farewell song and drank it. She was given another, and then another. The old woman urged her to drink quickly and join her master. By now the girl was dazed and confused. The men began to bang their shields with wooden staves to drown out her cries so that other slave girls wouldn't be afraid to die with their masters in the future. 6 men entered the pavilion on the ship and had sex with her one last time. Then they laid her down next to her dead master. 2 men held her hands, 2 held her feet. The angel of death placed a cord around her neck and gave the ends to 2 men to pull. As they strangled her, the old woman took a broad-bladed dagger and plunged it again and again between the girl's ribs until she was dead. The final act was swift. The chieftain's closest male relative, completely naked, walked backwards towards the ship, holding a flaming piece of wood, and set the pyre ablaze. A fierce wind kicked up and the fire roared. An hour later, the ship, the chieftain, the girl, and all the sacrifices were nothing but ash and dust.
Ibn Fadlan's mission was to build a fortress. He never got the money, and the fortress was never built. But he returned with something far more valuable, a story, a true, unfiltered, and unforgettable snapshot of a lost world, reminding us that history is always more complex, more surprising, and more human than we could ever imagine. Thanks for joining me on this incredible journey back in time. What part of Ibn Fadlan's story shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this glimpse into a forgotten chapter of history, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a good story. See you next time.